So Napari is a n-dimensional, multi-dimensional data viewer in Python. The driving motivation for Napari is to provide fast visualization of multi-dimensional data sets. And so in this context, that means, we want all of the visualization rendering to be GPU powered. And for that, we lean very heavily on the existing Python ecosystem. Specifically, BizPy is a library that we use for our visualization. It's super important to us to integrate well with the existing scientific Python ecosystem. I'm sort of pointing out some of the giant shoulders we're standing on down here. I'll mention them later in the talk, but we often like to say that Napari headless is just Python. So we want to be a visualization platform on top of the broad scientific Python ecosystem, which obviously everyone knows has just blown up in the last decade or so. It's important for us to sort of be, by default, supporting modern, arbitrarily large data formats. So this is data that's too large for memory, possibly loaded from a remote cloud store. And for that, we lean very heavily on Dask and Zar. We want it to be extensible and customizable. So in that regard, we want to keep the core Napari as relatively thin so that people can build on top of it what they need it to be, rather than to impose our concept of what an analysis platform might need to be. You'll notice actually none of these bullet points include analysis focused things. We absolutely want Napari to be an analysis program, but at the moment, at least, Napari itself is really not providing the core analysis steps. That is Python. Python has an incredible wealth of analysis pipelines, and we want to, stand at the end of that and provide a nice way to visualize it. Perhaps be involved in the pipeline of shepherding data through the pipeline, but we don't want to reinvent any wheels there. And then lastly, it's an inclusive, community-driven environment. We welcome anybody to come tell us what you need it to be, and if you're inspired by anything you see here, I'll have a slide at the end telling you ways to get involved. So the Napari viewer. I think everybody who's familiar with any sort of viewer like ImageJ or Fiji will be familiar with the basic ideas. We have a canvas on which the data is shown. The layer list shown over here is a really key concept about Napari, and that's actually what I'll talk about a lot. Layers represent different data types. So it might be an image, might be points, might be a surface or vectors, etc. And each type of layer comes with a set of controls. So, image, you're going to adjust color map, contrast, gamma. Points might have different rendering characteristics. So each type of layer has a set of layer controls. And when you select a given layer type, the corresponding layer controls will show. Obviously, being a multidimensional viewer, we need a way to explore the dimensions. So anytime you add data that has more than 2 dimensions, the dimension sliders will show up there. And there's some buttons for controlling, for instance, the display, toggling between 2D and 3D here. Everything I'm showing you is sort of fundamentally multidimensional. So we can very easily go between a 2D and a 3D representation, as I'll show you. So yeah, layers are really a central concept in Napari. Napari declares a few sort of standard layer types, about 7 different layer types, each of which has an associated set of rendering and controls. So images obviously have a way we might render them with color maps and gamma. And that is actually what I'm going to kind of dig into here. And one of the key points here is this is sort of a Photoshop-like layout where all of the layers are presented on top of each other. You can toggle the visibility of one or the other in the layer list. So what's, the goal is basically to have the output of your analysis overlaid with the data such that you can very interactively do what you need to do. So yeah, so layers. Obviously of primary interest to this group is the image layer. This does all the standard stuff you would expect for an array of intensity values. You can toggle visibility, change contrast or gamma or color lookup. And of course, it's multidimensional first, so we can render volumes like that. We also have support for multi-resolution or pyramid images. So this is a many gigapixel data set that is actually being loaded directly from the image data resource. This is sort of like a Google Maps view, right? Where there's many different scales of resolution stored in the file that we can show depending on the zoom level. So you can zoom from way out all the way in and see the context. That is partially thanks to Czar, and thank you to IDR for hosting that data. One thing that is that we can take advantage of is Dask is a Python library that is really good for lazily computing and loading data. So what I'm showing you here is a lattice light sheet data set where nothing has been pre-processed. So as we go from time point to time point, it is loading. For those of you who aren't familiar with lattice data, it requires some pre-processing generally to view. So we might load the file, do some transformations to it, perhaps do some deconvolution to it. And what you're seeing here is all of that is done on the fly each time point. And I kind of want to point out something here. It's slower, right? So when we show these things, it's not always, oh, look how fast and beautiful it is. But what I can say here is that this data is stored in about, a fifth to a tenth of the size on disk versus having done all of this ahead of time. So that sort of dynamic lazy loading is definitely something that's important for future-proof large data sets. We have labels. Labels are an array of integers, most often used for like segmentation. Got all the standard painting tools in there. This has been really important for machine learning data sets and training data sets. And we've had a lot of success with some of the early adopters of these amazing segmentation libraries in Python. One of the great things here is, of course, machine learning is very strong in Python with PyTorch and TensorFlow. So that's a primary thing we want to support. This, of course, works in 3D too. Points are coordinates, 2D, 3D, ND. And here's one of the places where VisPy, the library that we use for rendering, really shines. This is 200,000 points here in 3D, each of which is rendered at a different color and scale. And that sort of thing is really hard to do without GPU rendering. Also want to point out here that this isn't necessarily like super workstation grade GPU. This can work pretty well with a standard MacBook GPU, that rendering at least. Vectors are vectors in space. This is a pretty cool data set provided by Alistair Burt showing it was a cryo electrogram where they did particle averaging and found the orientation of individual capsid proteins in an HIV virus. And so we're showing the orientation of each of those there. You're also seeing a points layer there. Probably of particular interest to this group is tracks. So this was a pretty cool layer contributed by Alan Lowe. Where obviously we have provenance of points associated over time. And you have all the rendering things you might want for there, like adjusting tail length and width. And of course, it too is ready to support multidimensional data sets. Again, we're not doing the tracking in Napari. So this tracking is done outside of Napari using, could be TrackMate or BTrack or, UTrack or any of the sort of existing tracking solutions. What we support is visualization of that once it's done, you put it in there. Right, so here's a pretty cool example of a plugin he built on top of this, showing a lineage of cells after in a widget in Napari. Surfaces are 2D or ND manifolds in some space. So this is great, obviously, for things like brain and MRI rendering. Because we can also add an additional dimension here. We have like intensity across that surface over time. So this would be awesome for something like an fMRI study. Shapes is the last one I'm going to show you, and this is vectorial based regions of interest. So as opposed to labels, which are pixel based, this one, of course, is storing a vector that you could export as an SVG perhaps and load into Illustrator or any sort of vectorial editor. So those are the fundamental types. And the concept here is that if you have some data processing pipeline that you can represent in one of the fundamental types, then Napari provides support to overlay all of these things at once. And if a type doesn't exist that you want, that's a great target for a contribution. We welcome you to share that idea. Interactivity is really important to us. So at the moment, a lot of this sort of does use interactive Python in the background, and so there's a built-in console. What I'm showing you here is, I'll go back. We've got an image data set, and you can just go ahead and import anything from the Python ecosystem. Here I'm using scikit-image to apply a threshold. This is absolutely the kind of thing that eventually, will be in a dropdown, perhaps provided by a plugin. So we do want this to all be accessible via the GUI for non-programmers. Absolutely, that is a priority. But also, we want it to be super interactive for those with a little bit of coding knowledge. So here, for instance, I am adding points via the graphical user interface, and then going straight back to the console where I can see what were the coordinates of the points I added. So that interactivity is really important. And as I mentioned, integration with the scientific Python ecosystem. So this is an example that was made by Juan Nunez Iglesias, who we'll talk later today, showing prediction of a machine learning model as it trains. So on the graph here, you're seeing the loss function. This is a noise to self method where they use PyTorch and behind the scenes. So matplotlib is doing the plot there. So there's just a lot of existing Python ecosystem being shown in this as we watch the model train and gradually improve the prediction over time. Okay, so I'm doing great on time, I think. Installation is, if you're in the Python world and you have a Python environment, we support pip and conda install. You can go to napari.org to get some more guides on installation, but that's the basic idea there. And we have a bundled app. This is still experimental, but it's definitely something that is very important to us in the long run. We do want anyone to be able to use this with no coding experience ultimately. I'll talk a little bit more about this in the plugins, but we envision multiple levels of involvement with the guts of Napari. If you are someone in your lab who knows how to do some coding, we want you to be able to quickly, just like Fiji does, to quickly provide some plugins and graphical elements for other people in your lab to just drag, drop, click, and do this stuff using Python in the background. So the bundled app is available. You can get it at this URL. Also, if you go to napari.org, you'll find it there too. We have all major platforms, and this doesn't require any additional Python. So there's no need to go get conda or any of these. You don't need Python existing on your computer at all to have this work. It will bring Python with it. Plugins, yeah. So we're really excited about plugins. Obviously, the model sort of laid forth by Fiji and the example laid forth by Fiji is incredible. As Kevin said, that is one of the biggest successes of that model, and we'd like to be able to offer something like that too. So this is a work in progress. Our two primary entry points at this point. There are a couple more than that, but I would say the ones that are getting used the most are input-output plugins. So these are things that would let you take your domain-specific file format and get it into Napari. The basic idea here is that if you can convert your data format, in whatever format it comes into some sort of NumPy or Dask array, we can show it for you. So there's already plugins for the major microscopy providers, Zeiss, Leica, Olympus, Nikon, plus a whole bunch more. Widget plugins, GUI plugins, this is our newest edition, and this lets you drop a widget into the side of Napari where you can do pretty much anything. So I'll show you some examples of that, but yeah, these are the open-ended widget-based ones, which I'll give you some examples of. If you do make a plugin, we want it to be really easy for end users to get that plugin. So kind of like Fiji, we have a built-in plugin installer. which will search the internet, the Python packaging index, PyPI, for plugins that declare themselves to be Napari plugins using a certain method. And you can just go in and click install. You can uninstall. You can update all from there. So you don't need to use pip install as an end user. We definitely want to make it easy for people to make plugins. So we have a package called Cookie Cutter Napari Plugin. This is a template. It's a ready-made template for creating a Napari plugin. So the idea here is you run this template. It'll ask you some questions about your project, and it will set you up with basically an empty plugin that includes all of the packaging and distribution boilerplate. That can be really a pain in the butt. You may be really well versed in machine learning and be able to make an incredible segmentation tool, but simply getting it available on PyPI for people to install it is a real pain in the butt sometimes. So this helps with that. And there's some other goodies like testing and version control ready to go. Another tool we're trying to work on is auto generation of widgets and GUIs based on Python types and functions. So this is a library called MagicGui. What I'm showing you here is sort of a still experimental, but I've taken the filters module from the scikit image library, and this is the thing that includes like Gaussian filters and Sobel filters and Otsu threshold, etc. And we're using MagicGui to introspect the types required for each of these functions to give the user a widget representation, so that, for instance, the author of scikit image doesn't need to worry about graphical user interface programming to get perhaps their whole entire library of accessible via Napari. So that's something we're excited about. So yeah, I'm going to just highlight a couple plugins in the last couple slides. There are far more than I have time to show, so these are just a couple examples that I thought would be of interest to this group. Naparianimation is sort of the Amaris, movie generator of Napari. This is keyframe-based movie generation. So you can arrange the viewer in any sort of state and capture a keyframe, and then move it to some other state, capture a keyframe, and export a movie that interpolates and transitions between those keyframes. So here's a movie made by Alistair Burt. I showed you this data set earlier. So he's done some analysis. He's laid some points. This is HIV viral capsid, HIV virus, and each point is a protein in the capsid. And as I said, the vectors are showing the orientation. And naparianimation lets him render that and pop it into a Keynote. Naparimero is definitely still a work in progress. This is another example of the kind of thing you can do with a widget, though. So this is a plugin over here, and it just provides a graphical client on an Omero backend. So here I'm showing, I logged into my local Omero client. It shows me all my files. I can click on them. It shows me the thumbnails, and just like your browser would load from Omero, you can do it here. And of course, the speed of loading depends on your internet speed and all that. So that's definitely a thing that we need to work on, but that is a work in progress too. I would just say this pattern is sort of a broader thing that you can do. Like if you have any Python-based way to access some backend, whether that be the image data resource, anything on Amazon S3, anything anywhere, that it's relatively easy. We want it to be relatively easy to get that data into Napari. My cat is talking. This one was brought up earlier. So Robert Haas in Dresden has this heroic effort to organize a set of OpenCL kernels for GPU accelerated image processing. So the real gold mine in that library is the set of GPU kernels. And Robert's done an incredible job making those available across platforms, both in Fiji world and he's working to make them available in the Python world too. And so what this is an assistant. So he's got just buttons in the GUI that let you apply filtering or binarization. in a pipeline-like format. So you might do one and then another and then another. And what you can export here is actually a script that what you're seeing is that script is cross-language compatible. Well, not one script, but you can export your Napari pipeline into a script that could be used in Fiji using CLIJ in Fiji. So that's just amazing. And he has it going both ways too, where you can use CLIJ Assistant in Fiji and then come into Napari. So yeah, I just want to doubly emphasize what Kevin said earlier. This is not a competition. We are really excited about interoperability between these two platforms. The last example here is from Juan Nunez Iglesias, showing interactive image registration between an EM and a fluorescence image. So the widget you're seeing on the right here was generated by MagicGui, and he's just got a function that lets the user interactively click on a couple points in one image, and then click on the corresponding points in the other image, and interactively register those two. And of course, it's not going to be perfect on the first try. So this lets you refine the mapping as you go, clicking on points. And then when you're done, you can export your transformation. So yeah, Napari development is the work of many people. So many, it's hard to mention. There's over 72 contributors at this point. It was started a couple years back as a collaboration between Juan and Loic, and Nick at CZI got involved and has just really run away with it, contributing the bulk of the code. And Kira was involved early on, and I have been fortunate enough to be involved too. But yeah, hopefully this will be you if you are so inclined. We'd love to have you. All levels are welcome. There is no assumption of prior knowledge. We would love to have you. So I will just leave it with this slide showing various places to get in touch. Napari.org is our homepage where you can find all our tutorials and documentation. The source code is on GitHub, so if you'd like to clone and contribute, that's where you'll need to go. That is also where our bug tracker is if you find a problem. We are very active on image.sc forum. We love this. This is an amazing resource. Thank you so much, Kevin, Ann, and all involved in that. And for real-time chat, we are sort of standing by at Zulip. This is like a yet another Slack tool. And of course, we post our updates on Twitter. I just want to say it is so exciting for us to see this stuff on Twitter. I think it's watching these examples that people make. People are doing things that I wouldn't even expected they could do with Napari, and that is perhaps the most rewarding part of all this. And I'll end by saying we do have in-person meetings weekly. There are times that work for all time zones, so come join us.